My name is Detective Miguel Oliveira, and for 15 years, the grit and grime of São Paulo were the only ghosts I chased. I was a man of logic, of tangible evidence and cold, hard facts. The world, for me, was a clockwork mechanism. Every effect had a cause, every crime a perpetrator of flesh and blood. The supernatural was a realm for the grieving and the gullible, a collection of fairy tales whispered in the dark to frighten children. My reality was the harsh fluorescent light of the precinct, the smell of stale coffee, and the weight of a city's sins on my shoulders. Life was a predictable rhythm of case files, witness statements, and late nights that bled into early mornings. My apartment was a sterile sanctuary from the chaos, a place of minimalist furniture and ordered silence. It was my fortress of solitude, the one place where the ghosts of my cases couldn't follow. I was divorced, childless, and married to the job. A cliché, I know, but a comfortable one. I believed I had absolute control over my small, delineated world. Then came the case of a young man named Leo. It started as just another homicide, a statistic in a city that bleeds them daily. A young university student found in his small apartment in the Bella Vista neighborhood, a single, precise stab wound to the heart. No signs of forced entry, no witnesses, no apparent motive. It was clean, too clean. Leo was, by all accounts, a ghost himself long before he died. A quiet, studious boy with a small circle of friends and no known enemies. He was an easy person to overlook, both in life and in the initial stages of a murder investigation. The first hint that this case would unravel the tightly wound threads of my reality came a week after I took it on. I was at my desk, the witching hour of 3 a.m. painting the office in long, distorted shadows. The file on Leo was open before me, his smiling, hopeful face in the victim identification photo, a stark contrast to the grim reality of the crime scene pictures. I was tired, my eyes burning from hours of staring at screens and paperwork. That's when I heard it. A faint, almost inaudible whisper, like the static between radio stations, coalescing into a single, desperate word. Help! I jolted upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. The office was empty, a morgue of sleeping computers and silent desks. I scanned the room, my hand instinctively reaching for the pistol holstered at my side. Nothing. Just the hum of the old air conditioning unit and the distant siren song of the city. I shook my head, blaming exhaustion. My mind was playing tricks on me, a common side effect of too much caffeine and too little sleep. I closed the file, locked my office, and went home, dismissing the incident as a symptom of a weary brain. But the whispers followed me. They started subtly, weaving themselves into the fabric of my quiet apartment. A soft sigh as I was drifting off to sleep, a fleeting shadow in the corner of my eye as I made my morning coffee. I checked the vents, the pipes, the window seals. I rationalized every sound, every flicker of movement. The wind, the building settling, my own overactive imagination. I was a detective. I found logical explanations for everything. It was my job. The turning point came one evening as I was reviewing the case files at home. I had spread the crime scene photos across my dining table, trying to find some detail, any detail, that we had missed. As I stared at a picture of Leo's bookshelf, a strange coldness seeped into the room. The air grew heavy, thick, with an unseen presence. My breath plumed in front of me, a white mist in the suddenly frigid air. Then, a single book on the shelf in the photograph began to vibrate. Just a slight tremor at first, then more violently. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, thinking it was a trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by sheer fatigue. But when I looked again, the book in the picture was now lying on the floor. I grabbed the original photograph, my hands trembling. The book was on the floor. It had moved. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through my armor of skepticism. This wasn't exhaustion. This wasn't my imagination. Something was fundamentally wrong. I felt a presence in the room with me, a silent observer in the shadows. The whispers returned, clearer this time, laced with a chilling sorrow. He was here. He saw. The voice was young, desperate. It was Leo's voice. And I knew with a certainty that defied all logic and reason, that I was no longer alone in my carefully controlled world. The ghost of a murdered boy had followed me home, and my life, my sanity, my very understanding of reality was about to be shattered. The wall of skepticism I had built around myself for 45 years crumbled in a single night. A photograph changing before my eyes was not something I could rationalize away. It was a flagrant violation of the laws of physics, a direct assault on the logical world I inhabited. My initial terror slowly gave way to a desperate, gnawing need for answers. If Leo's spirit was truly reaching out to me, it meant he couldn't rest. And if he couldn't rest, it was because his killer was still walking free. The investigation was no longer just a job. It had become a personal haunting. I started my frantic search where all modern investigations begin: the internet. I typed in every combination of words I could think of: spirit communication, ghosts of murder victims, hauntings in São Paulo. I waded through forums filled with amateur ghost hunters and self-proclaimed psychics, my professional cynicism warring with the raw fear that now gripped me. Most of it was nonsense, but buried deep within a thread about local legends, I found a reference to a retired history professor at USP, Dr. Alencar, a man who had reportedly dedicated his later years to studying paranormal phenomena rooted in Brazilian folklore and history. His name was a lifeline, a fragile thread of hope in a sea of madness. My partner, Detective Isabella Rossi, was the epitome of a skeptic. She was sharp, grounded, and had a knack for cutting through my more imaginative theories. When I tentatively brought up the strange occurrences, phrasing them as gut feelings and inexplicable hunches, she gave me a look of pitying concern. "Miguel, you're exhausted," she said, her voice laced with genuine worry. "You're getting too close to this one. Maybe you should take a few days off." Her dismissal was a brick wall. I was alone in this. Telling her I was being contacted by the ghost of the victim would have earned me a one-way ticket to a psychiatric evaluation. The isolation was suffocating. I drove to Dr. Alencar's home in the quiet, leafy neighborhood of Pacaembu. He lived in a house that seemed to be drowning in books, stacks of them covering every available surface, their spines a mosaic of history, folklore, and the occult. He was an old man with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of centuries, a deep, knowing sadness in them. He listened to my story without a hint of surprise, his fingers steepled under his chin. "You are not the first professional to seek me out, detective," he said, his voice a dry rustle of old paper. "The veil between our world and the next is thin, especially when a life is taken with violence and injustice. These spirits, they are echoes, trapped by a singular burning purpose. They need to be heard." He explained that such spirits often attach themselves to the person most capable of bringing them justice. They communicate through means they can influence: electricity, temperature, and sometimes by imprinting their memories onto objects of significance. This led me to the key, the one piece of evidence that would blow the case wide open. While I was talking to Dr. Alencar, my phone buzzed with a message from forensics. They had finished their analysis of Leo's laptop. There was nothing incriminating, no threatening emails or strange searches, except for one thing: a corrupted, unopenable video file in his recycle bin, dated the day of his murder. I felt a jolt, a surge of adrenaline mixed with dread. This had to be it. I took the file to a tech specialist, a young prodigy who worked miracles with data recovery. While he worked, I returned to Leo's apartment, which was still sealed off. The air inside was stagnant, heavy with the scent of dust and faded grief. I walked through the small rooms, trying to see what Leo's ghost wanted me to see. The whispers were stronger here, a cacophony of fear and pain that echoed in my mind. The camera. He was always watching. My eyes landed on a small, discreet security camera mounted in the corner of the living room, a detail we had noted but dismissed, as the building's main security system had been mysteriously offline the night of the murder. The building manager claimed it was a power surge. Now, I knew better. The killer had been methodical. He knew about the cameras. The call from the tech specialist came as I stood in that silent, haunted room. He had recovered the video. "It's weird, man," he said, his voice shaky. "It's from the camera in his living room. It's mostly static, but..." There's something there. You need to see this. I raced back to the precinct, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The specialist played the file. The screen flickered with static, the audio a distorted hum. But then, for a few clear, horrifying seconds, the image stabilized. It showed Leo, alive, arguing with another man. The man's face was in shadow, but his voice was clear, laced with venom. They were arguing about money, about a deal gone wrong. Then the man lunged, a flash of steel in his hand. The camera feed dissolved into a chaos of static and screaming. But I had seen enough. I recognized the man's silhouette, his posture, the expensive watch on his wrist. It was Ricardo, Leo's seemingly distraught, wealthy uncle who had been the first to discover the body. He had a solid alibi, a business dinner across town. But ghosts don't care about alibis. The video was fragmented, the killer's face obscured. It wasn't enough for a conviction, but it was enough for me. It was the moment of pure, unadulterated terror. The ghost was real, the warning was real, and the killer was a man we had already questioned and dismissed. He was close, hiding in plain sight, protected by his wealth and influence. I now understood the full scope of the danger I was in. I wasn't just solving a murder. I was confronting a monster who had already killed once and would have no qualms about doing it again to protect his secret. There was no easy way out. The truth had been revealed, not by forensics or detective work, but by a whisper from beyond the grave, and it had dragged me into a nightmare from which there was no waking. The revelation that Ricardo was the killer didn't bring relief. It brought a new, more aggressive phase of terror. It was as if confirming Leo's spectral accusation had opened a floodgate. The subtle whispers and cold spots escalated into a full-blown psychological assault. The haunting was no longer a passive plea for help. It had become an active, desperate, and terrifying partnership. My apartment, once my sanctuary, was now a prison. The nights were the worst. Sleep offered no escape, only a descent into nightmares choreographed by Leo's agony. I would see the murder play out behind my eyelids, feel the phantom pain of the knife, hear his final, gasping breath. I would wake up shouting, drenched in a cold sweat, the ghost's terror momentarily becoming my own. The whispers were constant now, a relentless stream of fragmented memories and raw emotion. He lied, always lied. My money. He took it. Sometimes I would see him, a fleeting, translucent figure in the periphery, his face a mask of sorrow and shock. He never looked at me directly, but I always felt his eyes, his desperate, pleading gaze. The entity's attacks became more overt. Objects in my apartment would move on their own. A framed photo of my parents would be turned to face the wall. The television would switch on in the middle of the night, blasting static at full volume. One evening, I was shaving when the mirror fogged over, and a single word was traced in the condensation. Trusted. The letters dripped down the glass like bloody tears. I was living on a knife's edge, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. The lines between my reality and Leo's nightmare were blurring into a single, terrifying landscape. My attempts to build a case against Ricardo were met with a wall of money and influence. He was a prominent businessman, his alibi seemingly ironclad, supported by colleagues who swore he was with them all night. The recovered video was too corrupted to be admissible in court. When I tried to push, to reinterrogate Ricardo, my captain pulled me aside. He warned me to back off, that I was bordering on harassment, that my obsession with the case was clouding my judgment. Rossi, my partner, tried to reason with me, her concern now tinged with fear for my sanity. "Miguel, listen to yourself," she pleaded. "You have nothing. You're chasing shadows." Her words were meant to help, but they only deepened my isolation. They couldn't see what I saw, couldn't hear the desperate voice that was now my constant companion. I was alone, a man haunted by a truth no one else could perceive. This isolation pushed me to take desperate measures. I began my own off-the-books investigation, tailing Ricardo, digging into his finances. The stress was immense. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping. My reflection in the mirror was a stranger, a gaunt, wild-eyed man with dark circles that looked like bruises. My hands trembled constantly. I started talking to Leo, whispering back to the empty rooms, asking for more, for something concrete I could use. "Show me, Leo. Show me where he put it. The weapon. The proof." One night, the response came. I was sitting in my car across the street from Ricardo's lavish penthouse, the city lights a blur through my tired eyes. A sudden, intense cold filled the car, and a voice, clearer than ever before, spoke a single name right beside my ear: Campos do Jordão, the mountain resort town, a weekend getaway for São Paulo's elite. Ricardo owned a cabin there. I drove through the night, fueled by a dangerous cocktail of caffeine and adrenaline. The winding mountain roads were treacherous in the dark, but I felt guided, a spectral navigator in my passenger seat. I found the cabin easily, a modern glass and wood structure nestled deep in the pines. Breaking in was reckless, illegal, but I was beyond caring about procedure. Inside, the cabin was cold and sterile, as soulless as its owner. Leo's presence was a palpable force here, a humming, frantic energy that led me through the dark rooms. It guided me to the fireplace, to a loose stone in the hearth. My fingers, numb with cold and anticipation, pried it open. Behind it was a small hidden compartment. Inside was a black leather bag. My heart hammered as I unzipped it. There it was, a blood-stained knife carefully wrapped in cloth alongside a set of documents. They were bank statements showing large sums of money being transferred from an offshore account owned by Leo's late father into Ricardo's personal accounts. The motive: Leo had found out his uncle was stealing his inheritance. He had confronted him, and Ricardo had silenced him. A wave of triumph washed over me, quickly followed by the horrifying realization of my own vulnerability. I had the proof, but I was a rogue detective, a trespasser in the killer's private lair. As I stood up, the proof clutched in my hand. I heard the sound of a car pulling up the gravel driveway. Headlights cut through the darkness, sweeping across the windows. Ricardo was here. I was trapped. The ghost's guidance had led me to the truth, but it had also led me straight into the lion's den. My desperate search for survival had just begun. Trapped. The word echoed in the sudden, suffocating silence of the cabin. The crunch of gravel under tires, the slamming of a car door. Each sound was a hammer blow against my frayed nerves. I was a cornered animal, armed with a truth that could get me killed. The whispers in my head were no longer just sorrowful pleas. They were a frantic, overlapping chorus of fear. "He's here. He'll do it again. Don't let him." There was nowhere to run. The cabin was an open-plan design, all glass and exposed beams, a beautiful death trap. My only option was a small pantry off the kitchen. I slipped inside, pulling the door almost shut, leaving only a hairline crack to see through. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, so loud I was sure Ricardo could hear it. I drew my service pistol, the cold steel a meager comfort. The click of the safety being disengaged sounded like a gunshot in the stillness. Ricardo entered, moving with an unnerving calm. He wasn't the grieving uncle I'd interviewed. He was a predator in his element. He switched on a lamp, casting long, menacing shadows across the room. He went straight to the fireplace, his movements precise, rehearsed. He knelt, his hand reaching for the loose stone. I watched his confident posture dissolve into confusion, then rage, as he found the empty compartment. He stood up, his body rigid, and slowly scanned the room. His eyes, cold and calculating, swept past my hiding spot. For a terrifying second, I thought he'd seen me. This was the climax, the collision of my world, and the one that had haunted me for weeks. It was a confrontation not just with a killer, but with the madness he had unleashed upon me. Leo's ghost was a storm of energy in the room now. The lights began to flicker violently, the temperature plummeted, my breath misting in front of the crack in the door. A low moan filled the cabin, a sound of pure ethereal agony that came from everywhere and nowhere at once. Ricardo was startled, but not terrified. He seemed to understand on some level what was happening. "Still here, you little pest?" he snarled into the empty room. "You should have stayed dead." His arrogance was my opening, as he was distracted by the spectral chaos. I burst out of the pantry, my gun leveled at his chest. "It's over, Ricardo." He spun around, his face a mask of shock that quickly hardened into pure hatred. He saw the bag in my other hand. He knew I had it all. He lunged, not away from the gun, but towards me. He was bigger, stronger, and fueled by the desperation of a man with everything to lose. We crashed to the floor, the gun skittering away into the shadows. The fight was brutal, primal. He was trying to kill me, his hands closing around my throat, his face contorted in a silent scream of rage. My vision started to tunnel, the edges turning black. As my consciousness began to fade, the paranormal activity in the room reached a terrifying crescendo. The windows rattled in their frames, the furniture shook, and a wail of fury and grief ripped through the air. A heavy bookshelf on the far wall tipped over, crashing down with explosive force, missing us by inches but startling Ricardo, causing his grip to loosen for just a second. It was the chance I needed. I twisted, throwing my weight, and rolled us over. I scrambled for my gun, my fingers closing around the grip, just as Ricardo tackled me again. We wrestled for the weapon, a desperate grunting struggle in the flickering, haunted darkness. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. For a moment, we were both frozen. Then, Ricardo slumped against me, a dark stain spreading across his chest. His eyes were wide with surprise, a final silent question in them before the life faded away. I lay there, gasping for breath under his dead weight, the silence of the cabin broken only by my own ragged breathing. The oppressive cold began to recede. The flickering lights stabilized, and for the first time in weeks, the whispers in my head went silent. I felt a profound sense of peace settle over the room, a quiet release. I knew, with absolute certainty, that Leo was finally free. Survival came at a cost. The official story was a messy self-defense shooting during a warranted search, a story my captain, seeing the evidence I'd recovered, was willing to fudge to protect one of his own. But I knew the truth. I hadn't acted alone. The world I returned to was not the one I had left. My sterile, logical reality was gone, replaced by a world where the veil was thin, where the dead could cry out for justice. I was cleared of any wrongdoing, but I was not the same man. I could no longer find comfort in silence or solace in the dark. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret. Every whisper of the wind sounded like a name. I left the force a few months later. I couldn't be a detective anymore, not when I knew that the most important clues weren't found in fingerprints or DNA, but in the cold spots and desperate whispers that no one else could perceive. I now live a quiet life, a new, fragile equilibrium built on the constant awareness of what lies just beyond our sight. I am a survivor, but my survival is a scar. I am the man who listened to a ghost, a witness to a truth that logic can never explain. The evil was defeated, but the knowledge of it remains, a permanent stain on my soul. Leo is at peace, but I am left with the haunting legacy of his cry for help, forever marked as the man who knows that we are never truly alone.